tonight we come to the end of our story of Moses, and there's so much more we could have spent time on, but we're not here to do a study on the wilderness wanderings. We're here to do just on Moses. So we've of necessity had to keep it brief. I did put together some notes which are pretty much just my speaking notes. They're full of spelling errors. They're probably things that I might change later on down the track, and I don't take any responsibility. If you come and blame me for them and tell me off for them, I'll probably deny every word of it. But I will send a copy of those notes in electronic form to someone who can share it in the ecclesial newsletter if you want it. And then if there's anything you've missed, please go back and help yourself, mark it up, and come and complain to me about the bits that I get wrong. So we get to this part in the story of Moses where we would expect to have a little finishing line that says, "And they lived happily ever after." Last time we left our class with the Exodus 33 and 34 chapters, unbelievable chapters where a reconciliation was achieved for the nation, and the glory of God was seen, not just in fire on the mount, but in the power of forgiveness that changes lives. And that incredible moment where God revealed his glory to that man in his character. And we feel like it should be, that's the end of the story. Moses has achieved true greatness. He's brought us through this story to this point where the nation is told of God's glory in forgiveness and in kindness. And you would imagine that from here on, the nation are a totally changed people. They go forward in victorious triumph to march into the land and take it. They've been reconciled to God by their marvellous Saviour. They're forever thankful, forever submissive, and forever grateful because of the forgiveness they've received. But that's not family life, and that's not ecclesial life, is it? That's not how it works. Because so many of us, so often, fail to fully comprehend what's actually been achieved. You know, we saw in Exodus 34 and 35 something absolutely enormous, that declaration of the glory of God, which is going to change the whole of every disciple's life. Every person who comes to learn first principles must learn about the character of God and see that that's something that they're trying to aim towards being, that balance of goodness and truth, severity and mercy. They aim, and that revelation that Moses brought is life-changing. And yet we still go through our life often making mistakes because we just don't fully appreciate it. You know, they say that wisdom is not just learning more stuff, it's appreciating what you actually already knew. And, you know, in our life we see this marvellous thing that, you know, if you've lived in the corporate world, you get to 45 and you're on the shelf, you're finished. You probably can't do much greater in your career than that. But we've got a 90-something-year-old sister in our ecclesia who the other day said, "It's amazing how I'm starting to really understand things properly." Is in ecclesial life and in life in the truth, there is endless opportunities for growth, for learning, for becoming a greater person. And maybe true wisdom in our lives is not just becoming someone who has more facts in our head, but becoming someone who really, truly appreciates what the sacrifice of Christ was, what the atonement is, and what the drawing near to God actually means in our lives, the character of God. So Moses in his lifetime has achieved his version, his closest version of that in Exodus 33 and 34, and the nation is purely human, as you would expect, do not fully comprehend that in the full greatness of its nature at first. So they begin on this campaign against Moses in true human nature style. And we're told in Numbers chapter 11, we'll go through a few chapters, from Numbers 11 we'll follow through, that they gathered together, just read with me if you will, verse 10. Then Moses heard the people weeping throughout their families, every man in the door of his tent, and the anger of Yahweh was kindled greatly, and Moses also was displeased. You know, that's interesting that it says that every man was in the door of his tent. That is the sign of a concerted effort. Back in the time when they thought they were going to be destroyed, in Exodus 33, they were watching Moses and realising that all their hopes were pinned on him, and they stood every man in the door of his tent and watched Moses go out with fear and trepidation, knowing that their life hung by a thread. And it was that man's ability to mediate for them that determined whether they would live to see tomorrow. And now they all stand in the place where they congregated. The door of their tent was the place of entry and exit, but it was also the conversation place, like the gates of a city were the place where all the elders gathered to discuss the matters of the city. So here they are. They all purposefully gather where he can see them. They didn't moan about him in their back room where he would never hear. They got out and they organised to be in a place where they could weep and complain in a concerted effort. This was a protest, and it's slightly humorous to think that here we are. In this generation, people sit in front of computers all day, and when they want to protest, they go out and march. Here's the Israelites. They spent the whole day marching, so when they want to protest, they stand in their doorway. So, this is what they did. But it was an organised special effort. This is this special effort of complaining. They had organised and coordinated together to have a special complaining effort. And there's a serious warning in the outcome of what happens. Now, we've been looking as we go through at the personal pronouns, and that always telling, but here so much the more. Just, if you don't have this highlighted, you can do this as a little exercise. But I just want to read you Moses' thoughts and what's going on in Moses' head from verse 11 to 15. And there's a very severe lesson for us about what complaining can do. Numbers 11, verse 11. And Moses said unto Yahweh, Wherefore hast thou afflicted thy servant? And wherefore have I not found favour in thy sight, that thou layest the burden of this people upon me? Have I conceived all this people? Have I begotten them, that thou shouldest say unto me, Carry them in thy bosom, as a nursing father beareth a sucking child, unto the land which thou swearest unto their fathers? Whence should I have flesh to give unto all this people? For they weep unto me, saying, Give us flesh, that we may eat. I am not able to bear all this people alone, because it is too heavy for me. If thou dealest thus with me, kill me, I pray thee, out of hand, if I have found favour in thy sight, and let me not see my wretchedness. Did you notice the personal pronouns? It's absolutely crowded with them. This is the sign of emotional burnout. This is the sign that somebody has been ground into the dirt. This is the power of complaining. That persistent and consistent complaining is able to take a man who was the meekest man in all the earth and grind him into the dust to the point where such a wonderful man is ground down to the point where he can think about nobody but himself. It's just so sad. It reminds me of another man. You remember the man Elijah, and we haven't got time to go there, when he sat under the juniper tree, and he'd been ground down by the nation, and he sat under the juniper tree and said, Take away my life, for I am not greater than my fathers. It's exactly the same thing. And you can tell somebody, if you're on the outside looking in on somebody who's ground to the point of giving up, you'll see this, that they reach a point where they can talk about nobody but themselves. And there's an interesting lesson about people's depression. We're all going to, in some ways, either in our own family or in a family very close to us, face some sort of depression in this era. Why? Because the world grinds us down. It actually puts intense pressure on people in our day and age that is not possible for people to bear properly. And you will see brethren and sisters in your ecclesia who come out and they talk like this. It's a warning sign. If you see that sign, now what does God do? He provides a practical solution at this time. You notice God doesn't say to him, Don't be silly, Moses. This is nothing to do with you and it's not all on your shoulder. What God does is he quietly says, verse 16, And Yahweh said unto Moses, Gather unto me 70 men of the elders of Israel, whom thou knowest, to be the elders of the people and officers over them, bring them, and so on and so on. What he's saying is, get 70 people to help you out. There's a brilliant and very simple lesson here. If you're the one worn down, if you're the one on the inside and you've reached a point in life where all I can think about is I, because it's all too much. Seek help from elders, from brethren and sisters with spiritual understanding who'll help you out. That's what God did for Moses. That's the solution, the practical solution that he found for Moses. He went out and he got some helpers in the ecclesia. There's nothing fantastic about it. It's not rocket science. It's just a practical, sensible solution. You belong to an ecclesia. And if you see someone in your midst who's ground down by whatever it is in life, and it's not always avoidable, and they start talking like this, even if it's just the I, and that's all they can see in their life, they're blinded by this I, then maybe you need to encourage them, that they have an ecclesia around them, that there's people standing around them who are there willing to take the load. And that's an enormously helpful thing, and yet it's going to create other problems. There's a sad fact that what happens now is that the shift of leadership from Moses starts to, the nation around doesn't look at that and say, oh, he needs help, we'll be kindly to him. They now look at that and they say, aha, see, we can shift the authority away from Moses now and onto us. This is the cruelty of human nature, that humans will look at someone who's ground into the ground, and when they reach out a hand for a life rope, there's some who stand by and say, well, there you go, he's not perfect, so we'll take some of the limelight, thanks. Our pride can step up and take a seat. So even this sending out of other people to be leaders becomes a problem, in that the nation isn't really interested in just grinding him down. What they're interested in is democracy. They want their say. They want their piece. And so even this practical solution of these lovely 70 elders that help Moses out, it triggers down the line, and we'll see this in a few chapters, the people of the nation to see that Moses is not infallible, and maybe what they need is their share of the limelight. Quote from Robert Roberts: democracy is not the key to ecclesial unity. Submission to God and each other is. And you say, so you're saying democracy is not that great, James, but we have to have it in ecclesias. We have votes, we have ballots, we do all these things by democracy. We have committees and organisations that we vote on. Yes, we do. And Brother Roberts goes on to explain that it's a solution that we have to have for the moment because Christ is not in our midst. Once Christ comes, there will not be democracy. Democracy, though the world raves about it and says how marvellous it is not the ideal. It's not the ideal at all. It's just one of so many of the failed experiments of mankind. Do you realise that the whole of mankind's history is an experiment in different kinds of rulership by mankind? There's feudalism, and then there's autocracies and dictators and so forth, and they all finish badly. They all finish up with guillotines and mass riots at the end of the story, each one. Do you really imagine that though the world raves about democracy, it's going to finish up any better than the one that finished up with guillotines in the French Revolution? Do you really think so? This democracy that the world raves about, fundamentally, underneath it all, there's still the same underlying problem, and it's humans. They think they're special. They think they know better than God. We have to have democracy in our ecclesia because that's the most practical way of working. But look how Robert Roberts put it. He said, yes, you might have to have democracy, but the important thing for ecclesial unity is submission to God and each other. We might be part of a committee, we might be voted on, but what we still need to be is submissive to God's will and God's word. That's the key to us all working together and actually making it work. It's not democracy that makes ecclesias a great place. It's submission to God and each other. There's a brilliant lesson in that. So even though in the story of Numbers it shifts from what you might call a dictatorship, Moses being the leader, to a democracy, don't think that's a brilliant thing, and as we'll see played out, it doesn't actually work out that well. Now, the first place it doesn't work out is the Eldad and Medad situation. So we have now in verse 27, there was a young man, he ran and told Moses and said, Eldad and Medad do prophesy in the camp. And Joshua the son of Nun, the servant of Moses, one of the young men answered and said, My lord Moses, forbid them. And Moses said unto him, Enviest thou for my sake? Would God that all Yahweh's people were prophets, and that Yahweh would put his spirit upon them. See that this is amazing. I really love this particular verse. It shows you the spirit and the calibre of this man. You know, someone who's truly realised what the sacrifice of Christ means, has realised that they've got nothing left to prove. They've got nothing left to stand up for and prove. You don't need to prove yourself anymore. What do I mean by prove yourself? I'd say I can't think of a good example. I guess it's like the new husband who in the first year he ceases to preen himself with the same vigour and attention that he did before he found the girl of his dreams. In the first year he thinks he's got nothing left to prove and he develops a rather wider girth. So there's in our life we can see people who think they've got nothing to prove, but no, this is what I'm saying here is, imagine you had been Moses and you'd gone to God and pleaded to see his glory and he'd granted it to you. Well, you don't need to prove. If you've really comprehended what that means, you've got nothing left to prove. God's shown his goodness to you. He's shown his undying attention to you. It's like that young wife who said, yes, I'm going to put a ring on my finger and be your wife forever and respect you. And the man suddenly feels that he's got nothing left to prove. He doesn't have to go about reproving his care and attention for that person. They've accepted him and said it will be forever. How much more when God has actually shown you his glory and his character and answered your request directly. And you think, wow, if I had that, I'd have nothing left to prove. I don't need to fear. I don't need to prove myself to anyone. So long as I have that person as a friend, I don't need to go around proving myself to anyone else. Well, you do. God's brought you to the point of baptism. Does God bring you to this point of baptism with the intention that you'll never make it to his kingdom? No. He brings you to the point of baptism in your life because he intends for you to succeed. You have been granted that blessing by him, that attention by him, that he has worked in your life to bring you just that far. And for those of us who've lived longer in the truth, and how much more has he done for you beyond that? If he is your friend, if he has shown you that friendship, what more? Why are you trying to prove yourself? Why do we need to stand up? There's only one reason. Our pride keeps cropping up. Our pride's still in here. We haven't got rid of it yet. But Moses had. Look at how Moses is. He is an amazing person. He says, I've got no pride. Why do I need to stand up? If other members of the ecclesia want to do speaking, great, fantastic. I don't need to be the greatest speaker that ever stood on the platform. There's nothing special about being on the platform and being a speaker. If other people want to speak, fantastic. That's great. It puts me in mind of the story that was told by dear Uncle Des Manser. And he says that he gave his first talk and people thought it was good, came up, patted him on the back, and an old brother came up to him and said, that was a good talk, Des, but don't get above yourself. Remember that if God ever needs a mouthpiece, he's always got Balaam's ass. And it's brilliant. The point is, you realise what you really are, and you don't need to be any more than Balaam's ass. That's all. Like, if you are God's mouthpiece, isn't that enough? If you are God's right arm, which Moses had been, isn't that enough for you? And yet, our human pride keeps trying to rise to the surface. Here's a man who's truly got that pride pretty much where it should be. We know he fails, but he's got it incredibly well under control. His pride is able to say, I'm not opposed to other people doing the work of God, manifesting the will of God, having the Spirit of God in them. I'm not interested in the pride and the glory that comes from that. There's nothing in that. Do you know, we had a lovely sister in New Zealand who used to cook for all the Bible schools, and those of us who remember May Travers are grinning at this point. And I do remember when she finished up at the Bible schools from many, many years, and goodness knows how many late nights and early mornings, she gave a very short comment when we thanked her for all the work she'd done. And everyone stood around and they thanked her, and she said, you know what? She said that if you put a spoon in a pot and stir it, you'll cook the food and you'll stir the food. But if you take the spoon out and someone else comes along and puts another spoon in there and stirs it, it'll still be stirred. It'll still cook. You know what? She was just saying that she was a spoon. That's it. That's all I am. And here's Moses. All that Moses really thinks he is a tool in God's hand to do a work. It's God's work. I don't take any pride in that. And it's an incredibly helpful attitude for yourself in the ecclesia. What pride is there in any work that we do in the ecclesia? None. You can't stand up and think of yourself as better than someone else because you've done some work in the ecclesia. It's just you're a spoon. You've done the stirring for today, but God may use another one later. There's no pride in that. And I'm just so impressed with Moses' opinion of himself. Now comes a low blow. Now comes the attack on him from his own family. In Numbers chapter 12 that we read tonight, if you were to think of what is the harshest of attacks that could be made on you, is it from your own ecclesia or from your family? I'd say family. Is it about your actions or your relationships? I'd say it's relationships. Well, here it is. It can't get much lower than this. His own brother and sister, who'd been his close team members, if you like, they were more than just brother and sister. It says in one place that Moses, Aaron and Miriam brought Israel out of Egypt. They were a team that, in God's eyes, had achieved this work together. And they turn on him and say it's about this marriage that you've got with a Gentile, with this Ethiopian. I suggest it's actually Zipporah, and that in the sense that she was a black person, she was darker skinned, and she looked different. She looked Gentile to them. It's incredibly tough to take when your own family actually attack you as well as everybody else. I mean, it's one thing you can cope when the world seems to be against you, but your family rallies around you. How would you feel if the world was against you and then your family turned on you as well for something else, for something that you could no longer, it's done. You're married, you can't change that. And the incredible thing is what Moses does in this chapter, is that Moses actually only says one thing. We read the story. Basically, God hears this. He strikes Miriam down with leprosy. And Moses says only a few words in this entire chapter. It says in verse 13, "And Moses cried unto Yahweh, saying, Heal her now, O Yahweh, I pray thee." Even the English, that makes 8 words in my maths. So there's a whole chapter where he's getting the harshest attack of all, and yet there's barely anything said by him. Where's the defence of self? Where's the, I think I'll get the last laugh? Where's the taking up the opportunity to now say, listen, Miriam and Aaron, I'm the one who's received the divine approval? Where is that? It's not there. Do you know, I would say that Moses was pretty under pressure, and Moses in his life has been at some pretty low lows. But I'll tell you something that I learned from this chapter about resilience, and if you study the subject of resilience, even in modern day researchers, they'll tell you the same thing. That they focus on the things that matter only. You look at it and something can go wrong in your life. You can have a catastrophe and you can sit there and you can do something that doesn't help. I don't know what that is. Say, for example, someone in your life, a dear grandmother has passed away, and you could sit there thumbing through the photo albums until late into the night. Is it going to do you any good? Probably not. You've got to get to a moment where you say, I will not let this submerge me. Doing this is not going to help. You could sit there and sit in your own corner and have a long whinge session and talk yourself over, we all do this, talk to yourself about how hard done by you are. Doesn't do you any good, does it? When we look back on the situation years later, what good was that? Those things that we did, going over and over those things that only made it worse, that only made it harder for us to take. As the hymn said that we sung tonight, what can these anxious thoughts avail thee? These never-ceasing moans and sighs, they only make it worse. So when you want to look back on that chapter in your life, which might be an incredibly dark chapter in your life, you want to look back on it and say, I just did the things that mattered, the things that were actually beneficial. And for all this chapter, he says 8 words that did good. How impressive is that? So there's an incredible, I find that an incredible lesson, and I understand from people who've researched this or have been through terrible tragedies in their own life, is that they put aside the things that are not going to help them and are not going to make things better for everyone around them, and just do the things that will actually make things better, will do for good. If you can't do much, then just get on your knees and say, heal her now, O Ale, I beseech thee. And sometimes in ecclesial life, you may be confronted with a situation where you personally, God can do more than that, but you personally may not be able to. What an incredible man who gets down on his, most times he throws himself on his face. I could say he gets down on his knees, but most likely Moses was face down in the dirt when he said that. There is no self. Self doesn't enter into it. His sister's life is on the line. You see, he's not interested in self, he's interested in her. And he throws aside all the whinges and complaints that come in unbidden into the minds of everyone who is human. He puts them all aside and pleads for the one thing that matters. So it's an incredible example. So now we get on to chapter 14. And it goes on and on. This attack. We have the search party return. The survey party, sorry. They've gone out to see the land of promise. And they come back and they told them this bad report. And everyone has their moment to think about it. And then an uproar breaks out. Chapter 14, and all the congregation lifted up their voices and cried and wept that night, and all the children of Israel murmured against Moses and against Aaron, and the whole congregation said, Would God that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would God that we had died in the wilderness. It's like this cracked record that keeps coming out over and over and over again. They just haven't learnt anything. Just look at verse 10. But all the congregation, verse 10, yes. All the congregation stoned them with stones, and the glory of Yahweh appeared in the tabernacle of the congregation before all Israel. And Yahweh said unto Moses, How long will this people provoke me? How long will it be ere they believe me for all the signs which I have showed them? I will smite them with pestilence and disinherit them, and make of thee a greater nation and mightier than they. Just look carefully. You know, the thing that they don't understand is they don't believe him. I think I did miss a verse that I wanted to read, and apologies. It's verse 8. If Yahweh delight in us, then he will bring us into this... Oh, sorry. No, that's Joshua's words. What I was looking for is the fact that they don't believe anything that he's actually said. They still believe that they should die in the wilderness. They don't believe that God's actually out to do them any good. They're a totally rebellious people. So what does Moses do at this point? Well, he says, And now I beseech thee, let the power of my Lord be great, according as thou hast spoken, saying, Yahweh is long-suffering and of great mercy, forgiving iniquity and transgression, and by no means clearing the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the 3rd and 4th generation. So he's quoting God's words back to him from Exodus 34. And he's pleading to God to be truly great. Now, this is interesting. We started this whole journey with Moses, saying that Moses was the second greatest man in Scripture. But the thing that was great about Moses is he never saw himself as great. He only ever saw God as great. But he truly saw what was great about God, if you followed all of that. It's the forgiveness of God. He sees the true glory of God is the character and nature of God. And he quotes it back to him and says, come on, demonstrate your true greatness. He called on God's greatness in that particular time to pardon according to his great mercy. Oh, sorry, that's verse 19. Pardon, I beseech thee, the iniquity of this people according to the greatness of thy mercy, as thou hast forgiven this people from Egypt even until now. And so God turns around in this chapter and he gives the two great responses that we know. And they are, verse 21, but as truly as I live, all the earth will be filled with my glory. But you notice there's the other one in verse 28. As truly as I live, saith Yahweh, as ye have spoken in my ears, so will I do. Your carcasses shall fall in the wilderness, and all that were numbered of you according to the whole number from 20 years old and upward, which have murmured against me. So there's two parts to God's covenant that he makes with them, and his swearing by himself. Firstly is he will achieve his purpose of showing mercy to who he will show mercy, and his character to who he will show his character to, so that the world is filled with his glory. That's the first part of his character. The second part of his character is, but it doesn't need to be with you. It doesn't need to be with this individual group of people in front of me. He can still achieve that purpose, and it doesn't have to be with the people who murmur against him. And there's a severe warning in that God can still achieve his purpose with or without you. And so I think that's a very sad moment for Moses, and yet a very powerful moment, that God cannot deny who he is. God does have a plan to fill the earth with his glory, but he also has a plan to do it with the people who are not going to rebel against him. Okay, let's keep moving because we are short on time, and I just want to finish with a positive note. We now have the rebellion of Korah. It just goes on and on and on. We are heading towards the point where Moses cracks, but the question I think you'll all be asking with me when we get there is, why didn't he crack sooner? Why didn't he fail sooner? So now we have the Korah rebellion, and it's Korah, Dathan and Abiram rebellion is just another variation on the rebellions that we've seen before. Come across to Numbers 16. It's the same spirit that keeps rising up inside humans every time. It's pride, it's selfishness. And here it is again, shown in all its true nature. Numbers 16, now Korah, the son of Izhar, the son of Kohath, the son of Levi, Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab and On, and so on and so on. And they rose up before Moses with certain of the children of Israel, 250 princes of the assembly, famous in the congregation, men of renown. And they gathered themselves together against Moses and against Aaron, and they said, Ye take too much upon you, seeing all the congregation are holy, every one of them, and Yahweh is among us. Wherefore then lift up ye yourselves above the congregation of Yahweh. It's the same threat, in a way, that we saw back in Numbers chapter 12, where essentially, even though the cover, the front for the complaint of Miriam and Aaron was about, you've married this Gentile woman, really underneath it, they were saying, we need authority as well. Well, here's Korah, Dathan and Abiram saying, listen, this is not just about you. We all need some respect and some position in the ecclesial setting as well. Just take the time for a minute to look at the pronouns that are used in this verse. And this has a very telling lesson. Just from verse 3. And they said unto them, Ye take too much upon you, seeing all the congregation are holy, every one of them, and Yahweh is among them, wherefore lift then ye up yourselves above Yahweh, the congregation of Yahweh. Do you know, there's a very salient lesson in this. It's the lesson of us and them. Do you know, in ecclesial life, we should never talk like this. There's a powerful point that in ecclesial life, we should see the ecclesia as us. You know, sometimes you hear, and sometimes we fall for this mistake as well, that the arranging brethren this, and they don't really understand my needs and my feelings. Sorry, this may not occur in your ecclesia, I pray it doesn't, but it has happened in ours. So I can speak from only Teacher Gully experience, that at times we look over there at them and we say, the Sunday school committee are not a very understanding, they don't really get us. They over there. No. We are an ecclesia together. Do you know, down through the story of Bible times, the truly great men talk like this. Here's Ezra. He's sitting in the street. It's pouring with rain, and all the people are embarrassed, and they're sitting, watching this venerable old man sitting in the rain and praying this: our sins have risen up over our heads and our transgressions. This from a man who probably never barely done many sins in his life. But he says our transgressions. What about Daniel over in Babylon? There's Daniel's great prayer in Babylon. He says the same thing. It's our sins and Daniel's sins? Daniel takes on his own shoulders and says it's our sins and our transgressions, speaking about Israel and the reasons they were sent into captivity. So the true leaders are able to put the sins of their community on their shoulders, and yet the true complainers stand on the corner and say, you this and you that, but not us. See, this is something, it's a very simple thing that we should say in our ecclesia, is that we should not talk in our ecclesia about us and them inside our ecclesia. Let's be a people who talk about us. What if someone was to attack your ecclesia? You'd say, yes, look, our ecclesia is not always perfect. We have our members who we are helping, who are struggling, and we work together. Is that how you talk as an ecclesia? It's a much closer knit family, and this is not what was going on here. These people were putting themselves first and putting themselves ahead. Well, we know what happens at the end of the Korah, Dathan and Abiram rebellion, but I will just note to you how far they actually got, and this would have been completely upsetting. All the different things that have been attacked along the way. Look at this one in verse 14. Moreover, thou hast not brought us up to the land that floweth with milk and honey, to give us an inheritance of fields and vineyards. Wilt thou put out the eyes of these men? We will not come up. So this is their response back to Moses. They basically say the promise of God that he promised to bring to a land of milk and honey is not true. That's not going to happen. How discouraging is that, to actually discredit the actual thing that they put hope, that everyone was putting their hopes and dreams in, of the land of promise. So we know how this ends. Basically, the earth swallows these people up and the rest of the nation would have been destroyed at the time. But Moses again beseeches Yahweh. And you'll see that classic phrase that comes up so many times in verse 4. He fell upon his face. In verse 22, and they fell upon their faces and said, O Ale, the God of the spirits of all flesh, shall one man sin, and wilt thou be wroth with all the congregation? So there's no pride. Like, seriously, if you want to show someone that there's no pride, try falling on your face in the dust. It's totally un-Australian. We wouldn't do it in Australia. But these men this was the leader of the nation. Can you ever imagine a politician throwing himself on his face in the dust and pleading to Yahweh for the sake of his nation? It wouldn't be dreamt of in this day and age, because that'd be the last election they'd ever win. But this man, he's got no need to stand up for his own election. It's not required. He knows that what really matters is the relationship of this people to God. So now they're going to face this situation where everyone is slowly dying. And you've just got to picture how it must have been that they're going through the wilderness, and as they're going, each day, as they move, they leave a set of graves behind them. And they move forward, leaving another set of graves, and when we get to Numbers 20, they leave Miriam behind. And when the children of Israel, even the whole congregation, came into the desert of Zin in the first month, and the people abode in Kadesh, and Miriam died there and was buried there. I mean, this is the woman that had rocked the basket on the river and watched it for the daughter of Pharaoh. This is the woman that had stood on the banks and led the sisters in a song of praise. This was truly a great person. And when the story is sung of the Exodus, it's said that all three, Moses, Aaron and Miriam, brought the nation out of Egypt. And she'd been there, even though she'd attacked him, she had been in so many ways such a strong support. Now, how low can you go? Sometimes in life, we struggle because of events. But one of the things that can take the wind out of your sails the most is when you lose someone that you've relied on, that you lose someone who's been close to you and has been a strong help to you along the way, and has been such an encouragement. And this is where Moses is at now. And they come to Kadesh, and it says in verse 2, there was no water for the congregation. They gathered themselves against Moses and Aaron. The people chode with Moses, and they spake, saying, Would God that we had died when our brethren died before Yahweh. Repeat, repeat, repeat. If there's one way to grind people down, it's the same complaints over and over again. And we know what happened. It's a sad story. And Yahweh spake to Moses, saying, Take the rod, and gather thou the assembly together, thou and Aaron thy brother, and speak ye to the rock before their eyes, and it shall give forth his water. And thou shalt bring forth to them water out of the rock, and thou shalt give the congregation and their beasts drink. And Moses took the rod from before Yahweh as he commanded him. And Moses and Aaron gathered the congregation together before the rock, and he said unto them, Hear now, ye rebels, must we fetch you water out of this rock? And he smites the rock, and the water gushes out. And the people couldn't care a less about the look on Moses' face. Their heads are down in the water. They're getting their cattle's heads and sticking their heads straight in that water. They don't care a less about the man who's been 40 years putting up with an Egyptian upbringing, 40 years slaving away in a Midianite desert being a shepherd, and now 40 years of a people grinding him down, and he's standing there with his face like ash because he knows what he's done. After all that time, they've ground him down to the point where he's cracked. He's failed, and he hasn't given the glory to God. With one word, must we fetch water out of this rock? You know, it's incredibly sad, and you look at that and you say, if anyone had a chance to say, well, come on, be fair, look at all the good things Moses has done. I mean, why does God have to punish this one after all these years for a brief moment where self came to the fore? After all these years where everyone around him has been showing their pride and self has been coming to the fore over and over again, and that's actually what's ground him down. The one moment he says the word we and smites the rock, then it's all over. He's seen as a failure. Why? Well, there's several reasons. Some of them seem harsh. You know, the Saviour, the true Messiah, must be perfect. That's one of the points. The other point we can learn is that a good life can be ruined by one act. You can do a huge amount of good in the ecclesia and burn it all down with just a few words. It's incredibly easy to do. You know, and it's also for the sake of the nation. You know, he says, Yahweh spake unto Moses and to Aaron, because ye believe me not, to sanctify me in the eyes of the children of Israel, therefore ye shall not bring this congregation into the land which I have given them. It's a failure to show God's glory. That had been his whole point. You see, you can make this big point through your life, and then you can destroy it with one selfish act. It shows the true devastating nature of human nature, that we can actually destroy so much. Now, don't for a moment say Moses is never going to be in the kingdom. It's all over. We know that's not true. But so much has been destroyed with such a little thing. And, God goes on to actually say in verse 24 something that would have been really, really upsetting. Aaron shall be gathered unto his people. He shall not enter the land which I have given unto the children of Israel, because ye rebelled against my word at the waters of Meribah. It's the first and probably the only time that word has ever been used of Moses. It's always used of the children of Israel. Always. They are always a rebellious and stiff-necked people. He just joined them. After all that time. Now, is this fair of God to judge Moses? Moses says, it's for your sake. Even when he fails and he has to accept the judgment of God, look at Moses. Look at this for true greatness. Even when he spoiled, it could look like he spoiled everything. Even in that moment, he says it's for your benefit. It says in Psalms, they angered him also at the waters of strife, so that it went ill with Moses for their sakes. There's still a lesson for the nation to be gained from how it went badly with Moses. How incredible a man is that you can give everything, and then when you fail, you can see that there's something beneficial. There's a lesson to be gained for the people that you've come for, because they provoked his spirit so that he spake inadvisedly with his lips. There's an opportunity here, says Moses, for my nation to learn how bad it is to speak inadvisedly with your lips. If you want to see a hard-bought lesson, I can't think of one much harder bought than that. It's 120 years, and he teaches a lesson which is, don't speak inadvisedly with your lips, because Moses did. Would you like to be like him? It's just an incredible person that can turn around after a blow like that and actually say that there's a lesson that can be gained from it. We know this is the case, and this is how it should be done. 1 Timothy, but the elders that rule should be counted worthy of double honour, especially who has laboured in the word and doctrine. For the scripture saith, thou shalt not muzzle the ox that treadeth out the corn, and the labour is worthy of his reward. Against an elder receive not an accusation, but before 2 or 3 witnesses. Them that sin rebuke before all, that others may fear. I almost wonder whether there's a reason why he picked fear. What was it that Moses actually taught the people right from the very moment they met God? He said, don't be afraid. God's put this terrible set of laws, the 10 Commandments, in front of you so that you learn to fear and step aside from sin. Now look at this. What he says is, if a leader has sinned, he should be rebuked in front of all. It's right. If someone in the platform here gets up and I say something, I teach you the Trinity, you should come and tell me off. And in fact, it should be publicised before all, and I can say, look, I made a mistake. That is wrong. It should be done, because when you are a leader, or you are in the act of leading in some fashion, your words seem to carry more weight. People will take that on and change their lives because of it. We can't have that. If that leadership is wrong, it needs to stand corrected in the eyes of all, because they may change their lives as a result of that. Incredibly, Moses besought Yahweh, and he didn't get the response of God actually turning back. He even asked God to let him off. Deuteronomy 4 says, furthermore Yahweh was angry with me for your sakes. It's not just in the Psalms, it's echoed in Moses' own words that it was for your sakes. And swear that I should not go over Jordan, and that I should not go in unto that good land which Yahweh thy God gave thee for an inheritance. And I besought Yahweh at that time, saying, O Yahweh, thou hast begun to show thy servant thy greatness, and thy mighty hand, for what God is there in heaven and earth that can do according to thy thy works. I pray thee, let me go and see this good land which is beyond Jordan, that goodly mountain and Lebanon. But Yahweh was wroth with me for your sakes, and would not hear me. And Yahweh said unto me, let it suffice thee. Speak no more unto me of this matter. I can't think of many places where God actually tells someone to stop praying. I mean, that's serious. These are friends. And he actually tells Moses effectively, don't pray anymore about that. It's breaking God's heart as well. But a lesson is to be gained. And as a tribute to the incredible depth of a man's friendship with his God, that the two of them together agree to go on with this decision, because it's for their sakes. It's for the sake of the nation, to teach them an incredible lesson that words can break. Words can do damage. Inadvised words can destroy. What did Moses do next? What would you have done next? I think I would have packed my bags and found a lovely spot in Queensland and said, forget it. Forget this whole ecclesial life. It's just too hard. You know, all I get is complaints. It's not worth it. I'm giving up. I'm going to Queensland, forget the truth, and I'll just live up there in some little shack and go fishing. That's it. It's all over. What did Moses do? You see, even though he suffered this terrible setback, it doesn't change a thing. He turns around, he walks back into the camp and goes back to doing exactly what he did before, of caring for the nation. It doesn't mean he's not going to get attacked by them and they're not going to chide him anymore. They are. They're going to give him a hard time again. And there's many brethren in Scripture who you'll find who turned around and walked back. Think of Jonathan. You know, David's running out to the desert, and Jonathan turned around and went back into the house of Saul to face a problem that he could never fix, and he's going to die that way. You think of Paul. He got stoned out the front of a city. What did he do? He gets up and he walks back into it and starts telling this ecclesia how they're going to cope without him, how they're going to cope moving on tomorrow. The truth is not about giving up, because God never gives up. And so Moses never gave up. Even if God himself gives you a setback, you get up and you go back. Because there is no self. This is the whole lesson of his greatness. There is no self. It doesn't matter anymore. The ecclesia is what matters to him. Do you know, I love this quote by Roberts. I'll have to shrink it a little bit to get it all on. It's from, I forget, the Ecclesial Guide. All official brethren are serving brethren. Now, where'd you see that in corporate business? The CEO is the leader. No. This is an ecclesia. All official brethren are serving brethren, but there are necessarily different sorts of serving brethren, such as managing brethren, presiding brethren, doorkeeping brethren, etc. But all are brethren. So Brother Roberts wanted us to use the term brethren, and it's not gender specific. The word brethren can be brethren or sisters. It is important to keep this feature constantly in the front. Christ placed it there. One is your master, even Christ, and ye are all brethren. This feature, with many other beautiful features, originally appertaining to the house of God, has disappeared from the religious systems around us bearing the name of Christ. And how? They think that they're number one, and they can do whatever they want and get away scot-free. Having returned to it, let us hold on to it. There is no authority, only service. The ecclesia does not appoint masters, but servants. And there's the spirit, I believe, of this wonderful man. This is true greatness. We're not here as masters. We are together as an ecclesia because we're here to be servants together. I've run out of time, and I don't have time to talk about the transfiguration, not that I was going to. It's a technical point which may be interesting. I think we've seen the greatness of this man that we started out to look at. But I want you to come with me to close to his final words. in Deuteronomy 32. How is it that a man can be so great? How is it that a man can have no need for his own pride and his own ego anymore in order to selflessly serve even when things go so badly wrong? How? How do you do that? In the Song of Moses, which is described as a song of joy by many, he says this, verse 4, "He is the rock, his work is perfect, all his ways are judgment, an ale of truth and without iniquity, just and right is he." Now we could go and spend a lot of time studying that, but I just want to pick up this point, is that he felt that he had a friend who was a rock. Weird choice of phrase. What is that? It's something that never moves. It's something that's stable. It's something that you can rely on. It's something you can hold on to. It's something that's forever there. And you know, we do face dark days in our lives, and maybe so much the more as we see the day approaching. Maybe because God's putting us through last-minute trials to finally polish up our character because there's not much time left. Maybe we are, and I know so many brothers and sisters in our ecclesia who've been through some horrendous things in the last 12 months for the polishing of their character, but God is a rock. And Moses, throughout all his life, never lost sight of the stability of God being there for him, and that he could not be moved when he was with God. But I want to bring out just one last point here in verse 8. When the Most High divided to the nations their inheritance, when he separated to the sons of Adam, he set bounds of the people according to the number of the children of Israel, for Yahweh's portion is his people. Jacob is his inheritance. You know, the reason that people who are great can hang on even through tough times is because they have a vision. It's because they have a goal in mind, because they have something set before them which they value more than themselves. So he had a friend at his right hand who was like a rock, but together with God, he had a mission, he had a goal, he had an aim, he had a purpose that drove him on despite any rigours, any challenge, any complaints, any murmuring, any breakdown that he had. He still went on. Despite the fact that he was never going to see the land, he still went on. What is this mission? Well, you see, it says that when God set up all the different nations, and we could go back, and originally in Genesis 10, there's 70 different original families which make up all the nations of the Gentiles, and all the different nations spring from those 70 different nations. We're told that when that was laid out, God set the bounds of the people according to the number of the children of Israel. So he carefully organised the world to match the size and scale he had made for Israel. Let me explain. There's another place, and we haven't got time to go here, in Numbers 29, where there's the different offerings, where they had a symbolic set of offerings for all the different nations of the world at this particular feast. And each day they sacrificed less and less and less of these sacrifices. They started with 70 and they worked their way down until they just had one sacrifice. So they worked their way through, and I may not be explaining that correctly, but the point in this sacrifice, this symbology, was that all the different nations would give up their identity to slowly merge with Israel. That's God's purpose. I mean, it comes out, if you want a big, broad-brushed prophecy version of this, look at Daniel 2. What happens with all the different nations? They're ground to powder, and some of the wicked ones are blown away like the chaff, but then says, the mountain grows, it accumulates, it gathers all the dirt of this earth and grows into a great mountain until it absorbs all else. Why? Because Israel is going to absorb all the world. Now, why is that going to happen? Because what God's doing with Israel is going to be a lesson for the whole world. The whole world are going to be so impressed with the character of God, the glory of God that they see in Israel, that all nations will join themselves to Israel, modelling themselves on that people that God has created. The whole world is built around Israel, and the whole world will be merged into Israel, is what he's saying. From when God started with all the nations of the earth, he laid them out with a purpose that he'd work with this one nation here, and because of the character that was developed in them, he'd merge all the other nations into that in the end. Do you know, I think what this is like a parent. I want you to see Moses, as we close, as a parent. And when a parent gets that child and gets a child in their arms, they put that child at the centre of their cosmos. They're going to make that child the centre of their world. And for so many parents, this becomes a reality, that everything is focused on this child. What for? Because that's their contribution to this world. That's how they're going to change the world. Just this one little person at a time they want to develop, because they want to put the character of God into this person and make this person then change the world around them. I know that's unrealistic, but that's, in a way, the driving force, the inspiration that parents have for their dedication towards their children. And here's Moses. Israel was God's firstborn, but it was his firstborn as well. He made Israel his firstborn child. And he put that child, he saw that child as being the centre of his world, because he could see that if that child turned out aright, they would change the world around them. Do you realise that with your own family, with your own ecclesia? What are they going to do in the kingdom age? They're going to go forth, and because of the lessons that they've learned in this life, because of the things they've experienced in this life, they're going to change the world for the better. Do you know, you could look at Moses' words in Deuteronomy 32 and say, oh, he's got some sort of technical idea about prophecy and the nations of the world being aligned around Israel. No, you realise this is Moses' parting thought. It's something incredibly special. And what it is the thing that drove him. There were two things that drove him. That is, God was always there as a rock of stability that he knew he could rely on. Some friends will leave you, some friends will complain, some friends will bicker with you, but this one is always there. If you are with him, you have no need for your own pride, your own ego. You have nothing left to prove. He is your friend forever. He is the rock. His judgments are right. He will always be there. That sustained Moses through so much. And the other thing was his mission. His mission is about us. And I don't mean like you and I here. I mean, he saw his ecclesia, he saw his people, he saw Israel as us, as a community, as a family. And he wanted to give everything to make that family the glory of God. He knew, he could see a bigger picture in that by doing that, they would be his masterpiece that's going to change the world.